WRR is wildfire risk reduction. And the reason why we need it is because we've had a large buildup of biomass in our forests over the last 100 years. Wildfire risk reduction is really important because it allows us to manage the threat that fires can pose on our communities. We can't do anything about drought. We can't do anything about lightning, but we can manage the amount of fuels that are in our forests. In British Columbia, there's 840 woodlots located throughout the province. About 80% of those woodlots are located close to a community or close to an area that is called a wildland-urban interface area. So we have 80% of our woodlots that are in a wildland-urban interface area. Around the province, around communities, there are tactical plans that are in place for addressing wildfire risk and wildfire hazards. There are many woodlots, there's around 700 woodlots that are in these tactical areas where we can address the wildfire threats that exist in the province. Going forward, we need to be strategic about where we're gonna deploy our wildfire risk reduction strategies. We need to be able to get as much land treated as soon as possible, because what's happening is we're losing thousands of hectares every year to wildfires, and it's threatening a lot of our communities like we're seeing right now in early July. Wildfire risk reduction projects are very important in the province, and there's not one agency, there's not one group that can do it all. This is going to take all hands on deck approach. We have a lot of work to do in this province to deal with the wildfire threats that exist. And it's going to take a lot of people working together and coming up with innovative strategies to address this threat that we have to our livelihoods. We need to live in communities that aren't threatened by wildfires all the time. It'd be nice to have a summer without smoke. It'd be nice not to have evacuations and evacuation alerts. But we've got a long ways to go to sort that out. We could have beautiful woodlots like we have behind me here that George has done a beautiful job in treating the wildfire risk. This is located on his woodlot right beside his house. And there's a lot of woodlots that are managed this way. We can address the wildfire risk issues in this province, one woodlot at a time.
The wildfire risk reduction portion of forest management is one aspect of what we have to do to realign ourselves with the natural disturbance of fire on the landscape to protect our values and critical infrastructure communities. We work with First Nations, local communities, licensees, industry partners, and other agencies to be able to try to minimize the impacts of wildfires on the landscape. Places where natural fire and prescribed fire are not necessarily the best tools for a multitude of reasons. We need critical intervention of forest fuels that have been able to accumulate over a millennia of suppression and forest ingrowth. So wildfire risk reduction is a tool that we use to increase our ability to suppress fires and create defendable space and areas where suppression activities such as air tankers, heli suppression, ground crew efficiency, and wildfire intensities can be managed. The wildfire risk reduction and fuels management aspects of fire smart and forest management are critical to decreasing the intensity and severity of wildfires when they come into an area, and increase our ability and our time that suppression crews and suppression activities need to be able to establish themselves and defend critical infrastructure, human life and safety, and other values. These wildfire risk reduction projects are essentially a way for us to dictate where and how fast we can create our suppression lines when we have a wildfire that's impacting or threatening a piece of critical infrastructure or community. Woodlots play a critical role in wildfire risk reduction, just like any other tenure or any other industry partner on the landscape, but woodlots especially because of their connectiveness to communities and the vicinity to communities that most of the woodlots, especially here in the Southeast Fire Centre, have. They're a critical part in making sure that when a wildfire is on the hillside, that we have places and forests that we have managed to be resilient, that try to mimic what millennia of natural wildfire disturbance has done to balance and maintain a fire-borne ecosystem. In some of these places where woodlots are located, often close to communities, close to valley bottom critical infrastructure and corridors of fire, managing them for wildfire rather than just any other value is important, so that when we have fires that threaten, we know where our work has been done, we know where we can fight the fire from safely and effectively, and it's just another critical cog in managing our forest landscape to the disturbance that is natural on the land base, which is fire. And it's changing rapidly, so we need to be able to adapt and live alongside those. The best way to do that is by managing our forests that matter to us. A plan is a critical part of any operation, and a tactical plan for wildfire risk reduction in mind is critical to be able to identify what needs to be treated first and foremost, and afterwards what needs to be maintained, because the forest is a living ecosystem that is constantly changing and adapting and will need maintenance as well.
As we saw today, looking at partial harvest in terms of creating shaded fuel breaks for woodlots, and by shaded fuel breaks, meaning retaining some old trees of fire-resistant species such as larch, ponderosa pine, Douglas fir, reducing the crown bulk density or the amount of surface area of the crown through removing individual trees in between, looking at reducing the ladder fuels through knocking it off, as George pointed out today, with the machine or through pruning, and then controlling the surface fuel to some predetermined amount to reduce the spread. The idea being that for woodlots which are adjacent to typically within wildland-urban interfaces, or often, is that you can take a fire and have it be on the ground so that you can access it for suppression rather than having a crown fire. All forests, surface fuel is extremely important. So surface fuel being any fuel that's less than 7.5 centimeters in diameter, and making sure that it's not elevated above the ground. Again, crown bulk density, so having a lower density, lower amount of crowns, wider distances between trees, so that if it does go, it's not going to jump from crown to crown. Another thing that we could do in all forests is retain a component of broadleaf trees if they're naturally occurring. So rather than cutting them down, leaving them on the ground, we could retain them. They trap and they don't burn very well. And so we have operational trials set up for commercial thinning, where we are pre-measuring the amount of surface fuel, and there we do the commercial thinning treatment, and then we come back and measure the post surface fuel to see how well what's retained and how well the material has been broken up and is not elevated. And then so we can learn from that to say whether or not commercial thinning can truly function as a wildfire risk reduction mechanism or tool.
In 2017, on July 7th, we had lightning go through the Caribou, and that's a story that most everybody's going to be familiar with. That lightning storm started 8 individual fires on the Gavin Lake block of the research forest. By the time the fire season was done, we had burned over 1,000 hectares in those 8 different fires. The impact of the fire on all those various thinning approaches, harvest approaches that we'd taken, was really inspirational for me. I'm really keen to get out to an audience like the woodlot managers, the woodlot owners across the province. Thinning and silviculture works. It's important, and we need to be doing much more. So the wildfire risk reduction program is a really important activity, of course, designed to protect our communities. In your harvesting, make sure that you get as much of the slash you generate from your logging to the landing. Plan out a road system and develop it with wildfire in mind. Which direction are fires likely to come from? How can you provide defensible space, safe defensible space for firefighters within your woodlot by putting your roads in suitable locations. I think that the Woodlot program is a great example of ways that we can diversify our approaches based on objectives. A woodlot holder, a woodlot licensee has a variety of objectives to pursue, and they're not the same as the rest of the landscape. And therefore, woodlotters do things in different ways than what happens on the rest of the landscape. I think that's a critical piece of developing knowledge about how to go forward. And I would ask all of you to share your successes, not just amongst yourselves, but in the broader industry, to make sure that your learnings become our learnings across the industry.
It's something that as woodlotters we do need to take seriously. And I think that there's a real opportunity that just through our own harvesting practices that we would be able to do a lot of the treatments that are currently being done through funding programs. However, that being said, there's some treatments that some folks may have to do because they are right within the urban interface, i.e. where they have residents right next to their woodlot, where they most likely would want to capitalize on a funding source so that they could do a much more intensive treatment. I've seen treatments where a treatment was right adjacent to a school, and essentially this little pocket of forest was actually in between a school and a residential area. And in that case, funding was needed to be able to pick up all of the slash and all of the sticks and take the amount of fuel on the forest floor down to a super low level. So, and then I've also seen examples where folks are just carrying out their normal harvesting practice, select logging, and just through the very nature of their select logging, and then by going back 10 years later, 20 years later and doing the select logging again, they're just by the nature of that activity, they're keeping the risk and the fuel loading down to a point that if a fire did come, the fire would be on the ground. When you go and do the treatments, the primary activity that's going to initially reduce the fuel loading of a stand is going to be logging. When you log from the spring until the fall, typically the limbs will stay on your trees, and when the limbs stay on the trees, you're going to be able to skid them to a central location to delimb them. Whereas if you're logging in the wintertime, your limbs and what have you will break off in the bush. And so if they break off in the bush, then that means that you're going to have that much more slash that you're going to have to rake, rough bunch, whatever you want to call it, in the bush, as opposed to having it at the roadside where you can already pile it. So it's much cheaper to do your treatments from the spring to the fall when the phloem and the juices of the tree are flowing and the limbs stay on so that you can get them to the roadside.
We have a unique opportunity with the Woodlot program today to get engaged in reducing the fire risk around our forests and our communities. So wildfire risk reduction and the funding programs that go with that is a really important initiative that all of us should embark on. Any biomass that is less than 7 centimeters, this phone is 7 centimeters wide. If we can reduce the biomass of all the branches and the tops that are less than the diameter of this phone, then we reduce the wildfire risk. In the past 6 years, we've been losing anywhere between 5,000 and 10,000 hectares of woodlot area to wildfires. We have the opportunity to conduct wildfire risk reduction treatments on over 100 woodlots with the funding programs that are in existence today, such as the Forest Investment Program, so that we can protect our woodlots, we can protect our communities, and protect our families.